The afternoon air in early April carried a deceptive gentleness. Soft sunlight, the faint perfume of budding dogwoods, and the steady hum of traffic on the street beyond the hospital gates. Yet, for Anna Collins, seated alone on a weathered bench in the hospital courtyard, the world had narrowed to a single unbearable truth. Her husband, Jacob, was in the intensive care unit, fighting for his life. Tears slipped down her cheeks unchecked. She didn't bother to wipe them away. No one was around to see. The bench beneath her felt cold even in the spring warmth, and she pressed her palms against her knees as if to anchor herself. Just months ago, Jacob had been a man full of energy, strength, and laughter. He was the person she leaned on, the one who made everything in life seem manageable. Now, surrounded by machines and monitors, he lay weak and fading. Anna's mind reached desperately for memories, trying to cling to the image of him as he once was. She thought of Jacob striding across the campus of the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville the day they first met. She had been a sophomore, lugging a stack of books through the crowded quad, when one of them tumbled to the ground. Before she could stoop to pick it up, a tall young man with sun-bleached brown hair and an easy smile bent down, handed it to her and said, "I think this one belongs to you." His voice had been warm, steady, unpretentious. It wasn't love at first sight, not exactly, but there had been something undeniable about the way he looked at her. Jacob wasn't the type who tried to impress. His jeans were worn, his sneakers scuffed, and yet there was a steadiness in him, a groundedness that drew her in. They ended up walking across campus together, talking about professors they liked and their shared dread of final exams. By the time they reached the library steps, Anna felt as though she had known him far longer than an hour. Their relationship unfolded with a natural rhythm. Study sessions turned into late-night coffees. Casual walks turned into evenings on the porch of his off-campus apartment, watching the stars scatter across the Arkansas sky. He listened to her dreams without judgment, told stories of his own struggles growing up in the foster system, and somehow made her feel both cherished and challenged. Jacob wasn't just a boyfriend. He was a safe harbor. Years later, standing at the altar of a small church near her hometown, Anna had looked at him and thought, "This is it. This is the man I will spend my life with." Their wedding wasn't extravagant, just family, close friends, and the scent of spring flowers in mason jars along the pews. Yet to Anna, it had felt like perfection. Jacob held her hands in his, whispered a joke during the vows that made her stifle a laugh through her tears, and kissed her like he meant it for eternity. They built a simple but joyful life together. Jacob found steady work, and Anna marveled at his dedication. He approached everything with quiet determination, whether fixing the leaky faucet in their starter home or planning the trips they dreamed of taking. On evenings after dinner, they would sit at their small kitchen table, sipping sweet tea and sketching out plans. A bigger house someday, vacations to the coast, and most of all, children. Jacob longed for a big family. 2 boys, then a girl, and maybe a set of twins to keep us busy, he would say with a grin, pulling Anna close as they lay in bed. She would laugh, swat at him with a pillow, and answer, "We'll see about the twins." But in truth, she wanted it too. She could already picture Jacob tossing a toddler in the air, hear the laughter, imagine their evenings filled with bedtime stories and the patter of little feet down the hallway. Those dreams had seemed so tangible, so close within reach. Yet now, sitting on the hospital bench with her body racked by sobs, Anna felt as though they had evaporated like mist under the midday sun. She pressed her face into her hands, recalling the way Jacob used to run his fingers through her hair whenever she was upset, murmuring, "We'll get through this, Anna. We always do." But this time, she wasn't sure they would. The shift from memory to reality was like stepping from warmth into ice. The April sun still shone, but inside, Anna was chilled to the core. The sound of distant laughter from a group of nursing students walking past felt foreign, as if it belonged to another universe. She thought of Jacob lying in that sterile ICU room, his once strong hands now fragile, his voice reduced to a whisper. Machines breathed with him, Monitors dictated the rhythm of his body. Anna inhaled shakily, forced herself to lift her head, and looked back at the hospital building. The glass windows reflected the sky, a serene blue that mocked her despair. Somewhere inside, Jacob was fighting. And here she sat, powerless, replaying the past because the present was too much to bear. The memories of their first meeting, their wedding, and their shared dreams swirled together with the harsh image of hospital tubes and blinking monitors. Anna clutched the edge of the bench until her knuckles turned white, whispering under her breath, "Please, Jacob, hold on." For the first time in her life, the future felt like a shadow slipping beyond her grasp. Jacob Collins' story had never been one of privilege or ease. Long before Anna met him on that sunlit campus, his life had been marked by absence. He had grown up in the foster care system, passed from one home to another, sometimes treated kindly, other times as little more than an obligation. The word family for him was a fragile concept, something other people seemed to have, but he only witnessed from the outside. Yet, despite the instability, Jacob never let bitterness take root. He remembered birthdays without cakes, Christmases without stockings, and long nights lying awake in group homes, listening to the muffled sobs of other children. But he also remembered the few foster parents who tried, the teachers who encouraged him, and the sense that if he wanted a different life, he would have to build it himself, brick by brick. From an early age, Jacob was determined not to become a statistic. While others in the system gave up, drifting into trouble or despair, he poured himself into school. Books became his escape, a way to imagine a future bigger than the one the world had handed him. Teachers noticed his sharp mind and his relentless effort. One guidance counselor once told him, "You've got grit, Jacob. That's something nobody can take away." He carried those words with him like a compass. In high school, while others partied on Friday nights, Jacob picked up shifts at a local diner, washing dishes until midnight, saving every dollar. He bought his own clothes, his own school supplies, even managed to put aside enough for a second-hand laptop. It wasn't much, but it was his, earned by his own sweat. When he turned 18 and aged out of foster care, Jacob faced the world alone. The safety net that had been flimsy at best was now gone entirely. But instead of faltering, he embraced the independence. The state granted him a small apartment in a low-income complex outside Little Rock, and he filled it with nothing but a mattress on the floor, a desk, and an unshakable resolve. College was never going to be easy. He worked 2, sometimes 3 part-time jobs to cover what scholarships didn't. He stocked shelves at a grocery store at dawn, attended classes during the day, and delivered pizzas at night. Sleep was a luxury he rarely afforded himself. But even in exhaustion, he carried a quiet pride. Every step forward, every test passed, was proof that he was shaping a life no one thought possible. Anna often thought about this when she looked at him. She had grown up in a stable home with parents who supported her, who believed in her. Jacob had none of that, yet he had carved out something beautiful. It was his resilience that captivated her as much as his kindness. He didn't wear his struggles like a badge, nor did he complain. Instead, he laughed easily, cared deeply, and lived with a gratitude that humbled her. There were stories he shared with her in fragments. Nights in foster homes where kids fought over candy because there wasn't enough to go around. The way he learned to sew a button back on his shirt because no one else would do it. The loneliness of watching other children run into the arms of parents after school while he stood waiting for a social worker. He told these stories without self-pity, almost with humor, but Anna could read between the lines. She saw the boy he once was, the one who had every reason to harden, but instead chose tenderness. It struck her, over and over again, how different Jacob was from any man she had ever known. Others boasted about their achievements. Jacob rarely spoke of his. Others demanded recognition. Jacob quietly persevered. Where some men carried arrogance, he carried empathy. He noticed when Anna was tired, when she needed encouragement, when she simply needed someone to listen. That, more than anything, was why she fell in love with him. Jacob wasn't extraordinary because of wealth or status. He was extraordinary because he had every reason to give up on humanity and didn't. He had taken the broken pieces of his past and built something whole. Not perfect, but strong, steady, real. Anna leaned back against the cold bench outside the hospital, recalling these truths. In her darkest moments, when fear threatened to crush her, she reminded herself, this was Jacob, the man who had survived foster care, the man who had clawed his way into college, into a career, into a life they had built together. He had fought against the odds before, and he had won. Yet, as much as she clung to that hope, the image of him in the ICU kept breaking through. Machines breathing for him, his body fragile, his voice weak. She tried to reconcile the two images, the resilient boy who had refused to quit and the man lying helpless in a hospital bed. Her heart whispered that if anyone could fight this, it would be Jacob. Still, the fear lingered. The past proved his strength, but the present was merciless. Anna pressed her hand against her chest, as if holding herself together, and whispered into the April air, "You've made it through worse. Please make it through this." In the years following their wedding, Anna and Jacob Collins built a life together that, on the surface, looked exactly like what they had always wanted. Their home was modest but filled with laughter. Evenings were spent cooking simple dinners side by side, music playing softly in the background, Jacob wrapping his arms around Anna as she stirred a pot on the stove. On weekends, they went hiking through the Ozark trails, their hands clasped, their conversations wandering easily from work to dreams of the future. Those dreams, however, always circled back to children. From the very beginning, they had both pictured a house filled with little voices, scattered toys, the chaos and joy of parenthood. Jacob, who had grown up without a steady family, longed for it fiercely. Anna wanted it just as badly, imagining the nursery they would decorate, the bedtime stories Jacob would tell, the family traditions they would create together. But as months passed and pregnancy tests came back negative, worry began to creep in. What started as optimism slowly gave way to unease. Friends around them announced pregnancies, posted baby pictures through birthday parties, while Anna forced smiles and congratulated them, even as her own heart ached. Jacob would hold her hand, whispering, "Our time will come," but each passing season without change made the silence heavier. Doctors' visits began. First, the routine tests, then more invasive procedures. Eventually, the recommendation came: in vitro fertilization. At first, it felt like hope reborn. They clung to the possibility that science might give them the family they had dreamed of. They poured their savings into the treatments, rearranged their schedules around medical appointments, lived by cycles and injections. Anna remembered the first time she saw the embryo on the screen, a tiny speck of light that represented everything they had longed for. She held Jacob's hand and whispered, "This is it. This has to be it." For 2 weeks, they lived in cautious joy, daring to imagine a child at last. When the test came back negative, it felt like the floor had dropped out beneath her. And yet they tried again, and again. Each time, Anna told herself it would be different. Each time she let herself hope. And each time when the results came, she found herself curled on the bathroom floor, sobbing until she was empty. Jacob never blamed her. Not once. He would gather her in his arms, rub slow circles on her back, and say, "We'll get through this. If it doesn't work, we can adopt. Family isn't about blood, Anna, it's about love. And I've got enough love for a whole army of kids." But for Anna, the longing for a child of their own blood remained sharp, almost unbearable. She couldn't help it. It wasn't that adoption seemed less. It was that her body's silence felt like a personal failure. She had pictured Jacob's smile on a son's face, her mother's eyes in a daughter. Each failed cycle felt like a door slammed shut. The treatments took their toll not only on their bank account, but on Anna's body and spirit. The hormones left her exhausted, moody, sometimes inconsolable. There were nights she snapped at Jacob over nothing, then crumbled into tears, apologizing for being someone she barely recognized. Through it all, Jacob remained steady. He didn't walk away when she pushed him. He didn't resent her for the shadows that had fallen across their marriage. Still, the tension was undeniable. Their once light-hearted conversations grew weighted. Dinner silence stretched longer. Friends' baby showers became unbearable reminders, and Anna sometimes made excuses not to attend. They both felt the distance, yet neither wanted to admit it out loud. To acknowledge it was to risk admitting that the dream they had built their marriage on might never come true. But love held them together. Jacob's quiet resilience, his refusal to let despair win, became Anna's lifeline. On the darkest nights, when she whispered, "Maybe it's not meant to be," he would take her chin gently in his hand, meet her tear-filled eyes, and say, "Don't you ever think you're less because of this. You are my family, Anna. You always will be." It wasn't the life they had imagined, not yet. But as long as Jacob kept speaking those words, Anna found the strength to keep hoping. Even as disappointment piled upon disappointment, their bond endured. It was tested, strained, bent nearly to breaking, but it held. And sitting now on that hospital bench, Anna remembered all of it. The dreams of children that never came, the nights Jacob had carried her through despair. She thought of how fiercely he had protected her heart, even as his own must have ached. The man in that ICU bed was not just her husband. He was her partner in every trial, her companion in every loss. And she prayed with all her being that their story was not about to end here. It began quietly, almost too quietly to notice. Jacob Collins had always been strong, the kind of man who could carry heavy boxes without complaint, who rose early for work and returned late, still with energy to wrap Anna in his arms. But then came the fatigue. At first, he brushed it off. Long hours at the office, the stress of bills, the weight of their ongoing struggles with infertility. "I'm just tired," he told Anna when she raised her eyebrows at how quickly he fell asleep on the couch. Soon, though, the tiredness deepened into something more alarming. Jacob started losing weight without trying. His once broad shoulders thinned. His jeans hung loose at the waist. At dinner, the man who had once gone back for seconds now barely touched his plate. Anna pressed him to see a doctor, but he resisted, muttering that it was nothing, just stress. The first bruise appeared on his arm, a strange purple blotch that neither of them could explain. Then another on his ribs, then his thigh. They looked like injuries from a fall, but Jacob hadn't fallen. He hadn't bumped into anything hard enough to warrant such marks. When a nosebleed wouldn't stop one night, Anna's fear finally spilled over. "Jacob, this isn't normal," she insisted, her voice trembling. "We have to get you checked." Reluctantly, he agreed. The tests stretched over days, blood draws, scans, consultations with specialists. Each time a nurse entered with a clipboard, Anna's heart raced. She clutched Jacob's hand in the waiting room, praying silently, her stomach twisted into knots. When the hematologist finally sat across from them, his expression told them everything before he even spoke. The words came out clinical, heavy, devastating, a rare hematologic disorder. His bone marrow wasn't producing blood cells properly. Without a transplant, his body would not survive long. Anna felt the room tilt. She gripped Jacob's hand tighter, afraid she might faint. A bone marrow transplant. She had heard the term before on the news or in passing, but never thought it could touch their lives. Now it was their only hope. "Is there medication?" "Another treatment?" she asked, her voice breaking. The doctor shook his head gently. "Supportive care, yes, but the only curative option is a transplant. We'll test for donors immediately." The reality struck even harder when they learned what that meant. Donors were usually family, siblings most likely to be a match. Jacob had no siblings, at least none he knew. He had grown up in foster care, disconnected from blood relatives. The registry offered a chance, but a small one. Matches were rare, and time was not on their side. Anna tried to remain composed as Jacob nodded slowly, absorbing the information with the same quiet resilience that had carried him through so much in life. But inside, she was unraveling. She lay awake that night in the uncomfortable chair beside his hospital bed, staring at the monitors, tracking his vitals. All she could think was that if they had been able to have a child, maybe, just maybe, that child could have been his lifeline. The thought tormented her. Years of failed IVF came rushing back with brutal clarity. Every negative test, every crushed hope, now it all seemed even more cruel. If she had given him a son or daughter, perhaps their DNA would have provided the match that could save him. Instead, she felt empty-handed, powerless, as if she had failed him twice, once in their longing for children, and now in his desperate fight for life. Jacob seemed to sense her anguish. He reached for her hand, weak but steady. "Don't you dare blame yourself," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "This isn't on you, Anna. You've given me everything I ever wanted. You're my family. That's enough." But Anna couldn't shake the guilt. She kissed his hand, pressing her lips against his cool skin, and tried to believe him. In the days that followed, the hospital became their world. The sterile smell of disinfectant, the rhythmic beep of machines, the hushed voices of nurses, it all pressed in, suffocating. Anna moved between the ICU and the small hospital chapel, praying with a desperation she had never known. She begged for a miracle, for a match, for anything that could pull Jacob back from the brink. The weight of uncertainty seeped into every moment. Meals at home grew cold, uneaten, as Anna barely left his side. Friends called and texted, offering support, but she often ignored the phone. Her entire existence narrowed to the fragile line of Jacob's heartbeat on the monitor. Outside, the April days stretched on, blossoms appearing on the trees, neighbors mowing lawns, children riding bikes. The world kept moving, but for Anna, time felt suspended, every second measured against the possibility of losing him. In that silence, in the sterile air of the ICU, Anna understood the meaning of dread in a way she never had before. Life, once filled with plans and dreams, now hung on a chance so slim it felt like chasing smoke. And yet, despite the despair pressing in, she could not let go of hope. Somewhere, somehow, there had to be an answer. She wasn't ready to lose him. Not now. Not ever. The days blurred together inside the hospital's sterile walls. Anna rarely left Jacob's side, and when she did, it was only to wander into the courtyard for air. On one of those afternoons, as she sat on a bench staring blankly at the fountain, her attention was caught by the sound of two staff members nearby, chatting as they took their break. They spoke casually, unaware of how every word they dropped into the spring air would lodge itself in Anna's chest like a spark. "He could have been a twin," one nurse remarked, her tone light, almost amused. "I swear, I saw a man out near Siloam Springs who looked exactly like the patient in ICU. Same build, same face. If I didn't know better, I'd say they were brothers." Anna froze. Her hands gripped the edge of the bench until her knuckles whitened. She leaned forward ever so, slightly, trying to hear every syllable. The second nurse laughed softly. "You and your stories. You always see resemblances." "No, I'm serious," the first insisted. "It was uncanny. He lives out in some little town off the main highway, kind of run down. But the resemblance, I couldn't get over it." Their voices drifted as they walked away, leaving Anna with a heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She sat there long after they were gone, her mind reeling. A man who looked like Jacob, out in the Ozarks. Memories surfaced, Jacob once telling her years ago about a time in his early 20s when he tried to find his biological mother. He had searched through fragmented records, made phone calls, even driven out to a foster home where he thought she might have left a trail. But the answers had been scarce, doors closed, files sealed. Eventually, the search had worn him down, reopening wounds that never healed. He had given up, telling Anna that perhaps some doors were better left shut. Anna had respected his choice then, but now she couldn't. If there was even the smallest chance that this man the nurse had seen was more than a look-alike, if he was family, then he could be the miracle Jacob so desperately needed. Hope, fragile and dangerous, flickered inside her. For the first time in weeks, she felt something other than despair. The possibility was so wild, so improbable, and yet it clung to her with an urgency she couldn't ignore. That night, as she sat in Jacob's hospital room, watching him sleep, the decision settled over her like a mantle. She couldn't tell him yet, not until she knew more. He was too weak, too vulnerable. What if it was nothing? What if it led nowhere? She couldn't burden him with another disappointment. Instead, she reached for his hand, resting lightly on the blanket, and whispered into the quiet hum of the machines, "I'm going to find him. If there's even a chance, I'll bring him to you. I promise." Jacob stirred faintly, his lips parting as if in response, though he did not wake. Anna brushed his hair gently back from his forehead, her throat tight. She pressed a kiss to his temple, sealing her vow. Later, in the dim hospital parking lot, Anna sat in her car with the engine idling, staring at the darkened road ahead. Fear gnawed at her. What if she was chasing shadows? What if she left Jacob for nothing? But the thought of doing nothing, of sitting by and watching him fade, was unbearable. She would go, alone, quietly, without telling him. In the morning, she would ask one of the nurses to keep an eye on Jacob until she returned. She would pack a bag, drive out toward the small towns scattered in the Ozarks, and search until she found the man who looked like her husband. As she turned off the engine and stepped back into the sterile glow of the hospital lights, Anna took one last glance at the ICU floor above. In that moment, she clung to the fragile thread of hope like it was oxygen, unaware of how profoundly her world was about to change. The next morning, with a small overnight bag in the back seat and her heart thundering in her chest, Anna Collins steered her car out of the hospital parking lot and onto the highway that stretched westward into the Ozarks. The road wound past farmland and thick stands of pine, the air heavy with the scent of spring rain. She had told the nurse at the front desk that she would be gone for a day, maybe two, and left strict instructions to call her if Jacob's condition changed. Driving away from him was agony, but the possibility that she might return with hope made each mile bearable. The further she drove, the more the landscape changed. Neat suburbs gave way to rolling hills, the asphalt cracked and narrow. Houses grew sparse, some with peeling paint, others sagging on their foundations. Rusted cars sat idle in overgrown yards, and weathered barns leaned precariously against the horizon. It was the kind of countryside where time seemed to linger, where poverty pressed down but resilience endured. By late afternoon, she pulled into a small town that barely seemed to exist on the map. A single gas station, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and a handful of houses scattered along the road. She parked at the diner, her legs stiff as she stepped out. An elderly man sat on the porch, rocking slowly in a wooden chair, his hat tipped against the sun. "Excuse me, sir," Anna began, her voice tentative. "I'm looking for someone. I heard he lives out this way, a man who looks a lot like my husband." The man squinted at her, chewing on a toothpick, then motioned toward the hills beyond the town. "There's a fellow out past the ridge. Lives alone. Little cabin that's seen better days. Folks say he keeps to himself. Some say he drinks too much, but he ain't mean. You might find who you're looking for there." Anna's heart skipped. She thanked him, her voice catching, and climbed back into her car. Following his directions, she turned onto a gravel road that rattled her tires and sent dust billowing in her wake. The trees grew thicker, the houses fewer, until finally she saw it, a small, weather-beaten cabin tucked into the edge of the woods. The cabin looked tired, as though it had been standing against storms for decades. The porch sagged, the paint long stripped away by rain and wind. An old truck sat in the yard, rust eating through the body, a flat tire sinking into the earth. Anna hesitated, her hand trembling on the door handle. She drew a deep breath and stepped out. The crunch of gravel beneath her shoes seemed impossibly loud. She approached the porch, her pulse racing, and knocked on the warped wooden door. For a long moment, there was silence, then the sound of heavy footsteps, the creak of floorboards. The door opened. The man who stood before her was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, stubble shadowing his jaw. His eyes were tired, wary as though unused to visitors. But what stole Anna's breath was his face. The resemblance was undeniable. His features were Jacob's echoed in rougher lines, his frame broader but stooped, his expression guarded. It was like looking at a weathered reflection of her husband. "Can I help you?" His voice was low, cautious. Anna swallowed hard. "My name is Anna Collins. I think you might be related to my husband." The man frowned, leaning against the doorframe. "Related? I don't know your husband." She pressed on, her words tumbling. "His name is Jacob. He grew up in foster care, never knew his family. But you," she paused, her throat tight. "You look just like him, like you could be his brother." A flash of something crossed the man's face. Shock, disbelief, quickly masked. He shook his head, muttering, "Lots of people look alike." "You're mistaken." "No," Anna said firmly, her voice trembling with urgency. "I know what I see. Please just hear me out." The man studied her for a long moment, his gaze sharp but conflicted. Finally, he stepped back and motioned her inside. The cabin smelled faintly of wood smoke and stale coffee. The furniture was sparse, worn, a few empty bottles clustered on a table in the corner. He introduced himself reluctantly. "Name's Matthew. Most folks just call me Matt." Anna sat on the edge of a faded couch, her hands clenched in her lap. "Matt," she whispered, "I think you're Jacob's brother, and if I'm right, you might be the only one who can save his life." Silence filled the cabin, heavy and tense. Matt's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as if wrestling with memories long buried. Anna's heart pounded in the stillness, caught between fear and fragile hope. Matt Collins sat heavily in a chair opposite Anna, the springs creaking beneath his weight. His eyes drifted toward the floorboards, as if the past he carried was etched into the wood. For a long time he said nothing. Then, with a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep and old, he began. "You want to know why I look like your husband," he muttered, his voice rough. "I'll tell you, though I've spent most of my life trying to forget." Anna leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly. "Our mother," he said bitterly, "was a drunk. Always was, as far back as I can remember. She had too many kids, never enough money, and never enough sense to care for any of us. The house was chaos. Dirty dishes stacked to the ceiling, empty bottles on the floor, babies crying in corners while she stumbled around screaming. I was the oldest. It fell on me to keep the younger ones alive." His eyes hardened, though his voice wavered. "I tried. God knows I tried. I changed diapers when I was barely old enough to tie my own shoes. I made peanut butter sandwiches when there was bread, watered-down soup when there wasn't. But it was never enough. CPS showed up more than once. Sometimes they'd take one of us away for a while, then bring us back when she promised she'd do better. But she never did." Anna's heart clenched as she listened. "Then," Matt continued, his gaze distant, "there was the baby. I couldn't have been more than 10 when she brought him home from the hospital. A tiny little thing. I remember standing by her bed, begging her to keep him safe. I told her I'd help, that I'd watch him, that I'd do anything. But she just laughed, and said she couldn't feed another mouth. Within weeks, he was gone. She left him at the hospital, just walked away. Said it was better that way." His voice cracked. He swallowed hard, his hands tightening on the armrests. "I never forgave her. I used to lie awake at night, wondering what happened to him. Was he alive? Did he get adopted? Or did he end up like me, shuffled from one place to another? I didn't know his name, nothing. Just that he was my brother, my baby brother. And I failed him." Anna's eyes brimmed with tears. Her breath caught in her throat as the pieces locked together. The man Matt described, the infant abandoned in a hospital, could only be Jacob. She reached across the space between them, her voice trembling. Matt, Jacob is that baby. He survived. He was taken into foster care, grew up without family, never knowing where he came from. All this time you've been wondering, and he's been wondering too. Matt stared at her, his mouth opening, then closing again, his face twisted with disbelief, grief, and something like hope. You're saying he's alive? That man in the ICU, he's my brother. Anna nodded firmly, tears streaking her face. Yes, and he's fighting for his life. He has a rare blood disorder. He needs a bone marrow transplant, and without family, his chances of finding a match are almost nothing. But you, she inhaled sharply, her words spilling out with urgency. You could be the one to save him. You might be his only chance. For a moment, silence pressed down between them. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Then Matt leaned forward, his hands trembling against his knees. After all these years, he whispered, after all the times I thought about him, you're telling me I can actually do something? I can make it right. Yes, Anna said softly, her voice breaking with both desperation and hope. You can. Matt pushed to his feet, pacing across the small room. His steps were uneven, as if the weight of decades bore down on him all at once. Finally, he stopped and turned toward her. His eyes, tired and bloodshot, now blazed with determination. Then, I'll do it, he said. I don't care what it takes. I'll get tested. I'll go through whatever they ask. If I can save him, I will. I owe him that much. I owe myself that much. Relief crashed over Anna, so strong her knees nearly gave way. She pressed a hand to her mouth, sobbing silently, then whispered, Thank you, Matt. Thank you. He shook his head, his own voice rough with emotion. Don't thank me. Not yet. Let's see if I'm a match. If I am, then maybe, finally, I can stop carrying this guilt. For the first time since stepping into the cabin, Anna felt something bloom in her chest that she hadn't dared to feel in weeks. Real hope. The very next morning, Anna drove Matt back into the city. Neither of them spoke much during the ride. Anna's fingers gripped the steering wheel, her thoughts tumbling between fear and fragile hope. Matt stared out the window, his jaw tight, his face pale with nerves. The closer they came to the hospital, the heavier the silence grew. At the admissions desk, Anna explained the situation in halting words. The staff moved quickly. Blood work, forms, explanations of what it meant to be tested for bone marrow compatibility. When Matt rolled up his sleeve for the blood draw, his hand trembled, but his eyes were steady. Anna sat beside him, holding her breath as though the outcome were already written in his veins. Hours stretched into a day, then two. The weight was unbearable. Anna hardly slept, pacing the hospital hallways, drifting back and forth between Jacob's ICU room and the waiting area. Every time she looked at her husband's face, so pale and fragile against the white sheets, her chest tightened with dread. She whispered prayers, bargains, promises to the universe, anything to keep him here. Finally, the hematologist returned with the results. His expression softened as he looked at them. You're a match, he said. The words hit Anna like a thunderclap. She gasped, pressing her hand to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. Matt blinked in disbelief, then slumped back in the chair as if all the air had left his lungs. Slowly, his lips formed a broken whisper. I can save him. Anna grabbed his hand, squeezing it tightly. For the first time in weeks, relief flooded her body, though fear still lingered. This was only the beginning of a long and dangerous road. The preparation for the transplant began quickly. Jacob was moved from ICU to the specialized bone marrow unit. Conditioning treatment started. High-dose chemotherapy designed to wipe out his diseased marrow and suppress his immune system so the donor cells could take root. Anna sat beside his bed, stroking his hand as the drugs dripped through the fore, watching the strength drain from his body. Every cough, every wince of pain tore at her. Meanwhile, Matt underwent his own regimen. For several days, he received injections to stimulate his body to produce extra stem cells. He endured the bone-deep aches, the exhaustion, the strange sense of his body working overtime. "I deserve worse," he muttered once, trying to downplay his discomfort. Anna touched his shoulder and said softly, "You're giving us everything. That's more than enough." At last, the day came. Day 0, the doctors called it, the transplant day, the rebirth. Anna barely breathed as Matt was wheeled into the donation suite. His blood flowed through a machine that filtered out the precious stem cells, returning the rest to his body. Bag after bag slowly filled with the material that could give Jacob life. Hours later, Anna stood in Jacob's room as the nurses entered, carrying the clear 4-bag that looked so ordinary and yet contained everything that mattered. They hooked it up with quiet efficiency, hanging it like a simple transfusion. There was no dramatic fanfare, just the steady drip of fluid into Jacob's veins. But Anna's hands shook, tears slipping down her cheeks because she understood the enormity of what was happening. Life was flowing from one brother to another. As the last drop disappeared into Jacob's body, Anna pressed her forehead against his hand. "Please let it take. Let him live." The following days were the hardest. The waiting, the uncertainty. The doctors called it the engraftment period, the time when everyone held their breath, watching to see if Matt's cells would settle in Jacob's marrow and begin to grow. Each morning Anna woke in the stiff hospital chair, praying for white blood cell counts to rise. Each night she fell asleep to the sound of machines, fear gnawing at her, hope battling despair. And then came the moment Anna would never forget. Jacob was awake, propped weakly against the pillows when Matt entered the room. The brothers' eyes met for the first time, not as strangers, but as blood. Jacob's lips parted, his expression one of stunned recognition, as though he were seeing a mirror of himself aged differently by time and hardship. "Matt," Anna whispered, introducing them with tears in her voice. "This is your brother." For a long beat, neither man spoke. Then Jacob's eyes filled, his voice hoarse. "All my life, I wondered if I had anyone. And here you are." Matt stepped closer, his own eyes red, his shoulders trembling. He placed a hand on Jacob's arm. "I should have been there for you. I couldn't stop her from leaving you. But I'm here now. I'm not leaving this time." Anna stood by the bed, her own sobs breaking free as she watched them. Two men torn apart by fate, now reunited in the most fragile of circumstances. Jacob reached out, gripping Matt's hand, and for the first time in decades, the brothers held on to each other. The three of them wept together, their tears mingling with relief, sorrow, and joy. In that sterile hospital room, with monitors beeping and sunlight filtering through the blinds, a family long fractured was made whole again. For Anna, it was nothing short of a miracle. 6 months later, the Collins household looked nothing like the sterile, fragile world of hospital corridors they had once lived in. Jacob had regained his strength. His cheeks carried color again, his frame filled out with steady meals and walks in the sun. Though the scars of treatment remained, traces of fatigue in his step, a lingering vulnerability in his immune system, he was alive and smiling. Matt had moved into a small house down the road, bringing with him his young niece, Maddie, whose bright laughter filled the spaces between them all. She had been shy at first, hiding behind Matt's legs when Anna tried to talk to her. But soon enough, she was running barefoot through the grass, squealing with joy as Jacob chased her around the yard. For Anna, watching her husband toss Maddie into the air and catch her with a grin was like watching a dream restored. Matt himself was a different man. The bottle that had once been his constant companion was gone. He still carried the scars of his past, the loneliness, the regret, but he no longer drowned them. Instead, he poured his energy into Maddie, into rebuilding a life he had thought was beyond him. He attended meetings at the small church in town, worked odd jobs fixing fences and repairing barns, and came home each night sober, determined to be the uncle and guardian Maddie deserved. "I didn't think I had anything left," he admitted once, sitting on the porch with Anna as the cicadas hummed. "But then I saw Jacob. I realized I hadn't lost everything. Family, it gives a man a reason to fight." Anna squeezed his hand, her eyes soft. "You didn't just save him, Matt. You saved yourself, too." The bond between the three of them deepened with each passing day. Anna cooked suppers where they all sat together at the table. Jacob, Matt, Maddie, passing dishes, sharing stories, and laughing until the house echoed with warmth. On Sundays, they piled into Matt's old truck and drove to church, Maddie perched between them, chattering about the songs she wanted to sing. For the first time in so long, Anna felt what she had longed for, a family whole and unbreakable, even if it hadn't come in the form she once imagined. She often found herself reflecting on the months that had nearly broken her. The endless nights in ICU, the fear that stole her breath, the crushing guilt over not being able to give Jacob a child. And yet, from that abyss, something unexpected had risen. Family, not defined by perfection, but forged out of loss, sacrifice, and grace. One evening in late October, the air crisp and golden, Anna, Jacob, and Matt set out for a walk along the quiet country road that curved past the fields. The sun hung low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet. Maddie skipped ahead, chasing fireflies that had begun to blink in the dusky light. Jacob reached for Anna's hand, his grip steady and warm. On his other side, Matt walked with shoulders squared, no longer stooped with shame, but lifted by purpose. Together, they moved in unison. 3 lives once scattered, now woven tightly together. Anna looked at them, at her husband who had fought through impossible odds, at the brother who had given him life a second time, at the little girl who represented the future they had thought they lost, and her chest swelled with quiet gratitude. She realized that hope had not come in the way she expected. It had not come through the child she once prayed for, nor through the life she imagined in neat outlines. It had come through brokenness, through the discovery of family in the unlikeliest of places, through the mending of wounds that once seemed beyond repair. As they walked deeper into the fading light, Anna whispered silently to herself, "From despair, we found strength. From emptiness, we found family. From loss, we found love." At the curve of the road, Maddie turned and called, "Come on, don't let me get too far ahead." Her voice rang clear and full of joy. The 3 adults quickened their pace, their laughter mingling as they caught up. In the glow of the autumn sunset, their shadows stretched long across the dirt road, for figures bound not only by blood, but by choice, by resilience, by love. And in that moment, with the horizon bathed in gold and the past finally behind them, Anna knew they had been given something rare. Not a perfect life, but a healed one. I didn't expect to see her. Not there. Not like that. The glass doors of Orion Logic hissed shut behind me as I stepped onto the polished floor of the 14th level. Everything smelled like eucalyptus and filtered ambition. Clean, efficient, and different. I had been practicing this moment for weeks. My resume was freshly printed, pressed flat inside a cobalt blue folder. The heels I wore were scuffed, yes, but polished. My coat too thin for a Minnesota March morning. But I smiled anyway, the way you smile when you've convinced yourself that preparation can outshine legacy. The receptionist had barely acknowledged me as she handed over the temporary badge. "Assessment room C," she muttered, pointing down a hallway that felt longer than it should have. I nodded and thanked her softly, maybe too softly. My voice never sounded the right volume in places like this. As I walked past the glass panels, I caught glimpses of the candidates already inside. Sharp suits, sleek hair, laughter that echoed in short bursts. I straightened my spine, forced my breath to slow. One of them looked up, then away. I took the only empty seat, a little too far from the center of the circle, just close enough to be tolerated, not quite close enough to matter. Then the door clicked. My fingers froze on the folder in my lap. She entered with the unmistakable rhythm of someone who believed every room owed her its silence. Navy blouse tucked into slate gray trousers. Hair in a bun so tight it looked like a sculpture. A gold name tag gleamed beneath her collarbone. Aubrey Whitmore, Director, Systems Innovation. My sister. She didn't blink when our eyes met. No hesitation. No flicker of acknowledgement. She just walked to the far end of the table, set her travel mug down, a brushed steel thermos that probably cost more than my weekly groceries, and took her seat as if I didn't exist. My breath caught, but I didn't let it break. Not yet. I remembered the last time I'd seen her, at a dinner for my mother's birthday. Aubrey had shown up 40 minutes late and still managed to take over the conversation in 5. She'd toasted to family resilience while smiling straight at me, knowing damn well I'd just lost a freelance contract she'd accidentally undercut. That night, she wore the same perfume she was wearing now, sharp, floral, expensive. The HR coordinator began to speak. Introductions, expectations, something about agility and innovation pipelines, but the words slid past me like water. My focus narrowed to the way Aubrey tapped her pen against the table. 3 short clicks, then a pause. The same pattern she'd used when we shared a room as children, and she'd try to drive me mad while pretending to study. I was no longer 12, but I felt 12. Small, invisible, sitting in a circle of strangers, while the one person who knew me best worked her magic on them before I even spoke. "Coffee, anyone?" An assistant asked, holding a tray. It made its rounds. Every person took a cup, except me. The tray passed, and my hand stayed empty. I said nothing. Then I saw it, the smirk curling at the corner of Aubrey's mouth as she leaned toward the woman beside her. She whispered something behind her mug, and the woman let out a soft, practiced laugh. "She still dresses like she shops in college clearance bins," Aubrey said, just loud enough to sting. My face didn't move. My eyes stayed on the wood grain table, but something inside me folded into itself. I inhaled slowly, then exhaled. This wasn't about coffee, or clothes, or even the job. It was about erasure, again. And what I didn't know then, but would come to realize in the hours that followed, was that this wasn't just another failed interview. It was the last time I would ever ask for permission to be seen. They began calling names. One by one, the candidates rose, clean silhouettes in expensive tailoring, voices smooth with years of being told they belonged. As they spoke, buzzwords floated like perfume: scalable frameworks, cross-functional leadership, agile deployment. Aubrey nodded at each one, scribbling notes with the same red pen that had once corrected my science homework with ruthless delight. When my name was called, Lana Cross, she didn't even glance up. I rose anyway. My folder felt heavier than before, but my steps were even. I placed the resume at the center of the table, right in front of her. She picked it up like it was a napkin someone had left behind, flipped through it for exactly 3 seconds, then passed it to the man on her left, Miles Kenner, VP of Product. He glanced at it, blinked once, then set it aside. That was it. No questions, no reaction, no interest. I returned to my chair. The room went on. Someone behind me coughed. I stared at the grain of the table again. Aubrey's perfume seemed stronger now, like a warning, or a verdict. Then I heard it, a voice, low but not careful, from behind me. "She's here?" Didn't think she was even in tech anymore. And then Aubrey laughed. Not loud, but real and sharp. It sliced right through me. I didn't flinch. I didn't give her the satisfaction. But something inside me, something small and tired, curled tighter, like it had been bracing for this exact impact all along. I adjusted the folder in my lap and remembered the hours I spent at 2 a.m. on a borrowed laptop, teaching myself data architecture while my ex-boyfriend called it a cute little phase. The time Aubrey forwarded my portfolio to the wrong client on my birthday. And the month after, when my bank balance hit double digits and my father joked, "Well, Lana's always been the artistic one." That's code for unemployed, right? I was done pretending any of this didn't hurt. The final candidate had just sat down when Miles leaned back in his chair and pointed his pen lazily in my direction. "So," he said, like he was addressing someone's niece at Thanksgiving, "what makes you think you're ready for the big leagues?" The smirk told me this wasn't curiosity. This was sport. I opened my mouth to answer, but Aubrey moved faster. She reached across the table and snatched my resume again, clicked her pen, the red one, and began to write. From where I sat, I could see the strokes. Wrong major, wrong look, wrong fit. Then, at the very bottom, in a sharp block of crimson ink, unqualified. She didn't say it aloud. She didn't need to. She slid the paper across the polished table, like she was laying down a piece of evidence. A sentence. A prophecy. I didn't blink. I didn't reach for it. I just sat there, feeling the heat rise up the back of my neck. I cleared my throat. I led an AI ethics redesign for 3 mid-tier platforms last year, I said, voice steady, and scaled a predictive system that cut client processing times by 34%. That framework is currently, Aubrey cut in with a syrupy chuckle, "still chasing those little dream projects," she said, looking past me. While I was presenting at a summit in London, she was still uploading resumes on Indeed. There were snickers now, quiet but unmistakable. One came from Nina Patel, HR, another from the assistant who'd ignored me earlier. It was happening again, but I didn't shrink. Instead, I looked at her, not at the director of innovation, not at the polished, flawless, boardroom version of my sister, but at Aubrey, the girl who used to read my journal aloud to her friends for fun, the one who told me I wasn't pretty enough for high school elections or clever enough for debate team, the sister who needed me invisible so she could shine undisturbed. And I realized something. She didn't dismiss me because I was unqualified. She dismissed me because I had finally stopped needing her to approve me. I turned away, not in defeat, but because I already knew the real answer to Miles's question. What makes me think I'm ready? Simple. I stopped waiting for rooms like this to tell me so. By the time the session ended, no one looked my way. Not even the assistant, who'd snickered. Not Nina, who had scribbled her notes without once meeting my eyes. And certainly not Aubrey, who now sipped from her mug like it held victory in ceramic form. The silence wasn't cruel. It was calculated, polished, just like them. I stood, gathered my things, and left the room as quietly as I had entered. No one stopped me. No one called out, not even to say goodbye. The building's air changed once I hit the elevator. It smelled less like performance and more like recycled air and janitorial wax. I pressed the button for the lobby and watched my reflection blur in the stainless steel walls. I didn't cry. I just walked, out through the rotating doors, into the Minneapolis wind, sharp, gray, mid-March, unforgiving. My blazer flapped open. I didn't fix it. My heels echoed along 3rd Street like I belonged somewhere else, though I no longer knew where that was. 2 blocks later, I ducked into North Loop Bean House, a place that always smelled like burned espresso and broken deadlines. It was mostly empty, except for a grad student with 3 laptops and a barista who didn't lift his head when I ordered. "Just a drip," I said. "To go. Medium." I didn't drink it. I just needed a reason to sit at the far table by the window, the one with the chipped edge and the view of the crosswalk. I slid into the seat, took a breath, and pulled the resume folder from my bag. It was still warm from my lap. The red ink stared back at me, bleeding through the back cover like a slow leak, like it had been waiting for me to admit something. Unqualified. The word sat there like a bruise, one I'd seen before. And just like that, I was back in 2016, sitting on the floor of my old apartment in St. Paul, my legs numb, a takeout box half-eaten beside me. I'd just finished a 6-week freelance job for a nonprofit, my first big pitch deck built from scratch. It had taken everything I had. I'd been proud of it. I showed it to Aubrey one night over wine. She was working for a boutique tech consultancy then. She had said, "This is cute. You always have such creative little ideas." I didn't think much of it until her firm released a nearly identical proposal a month later, presented at a conference with her name at the top. She hadn't stolen it. Not directly. That was the brilliance. "I didn't say it was mine," she'd told me at Mom's birthday dinner. "But if people connect the dots, that's not my fault." That job had gone to someone else. A man Aubrey had recommended. And I spent weeks trying to explain to confused executives why my concept had already been launched without me. I remembered the sound of my father laughing that night, glass raised. "To my daughters! Aubrey, the visionary, and Lana, the kind one." Kind. It had stuck to me like a participation ribbon. The word you give women when you don't want to say they failed. Back in the cafe, I blinked hard. The present came back in fragments. The clatter of the espresso machine, the rumble of tires over slush outside, the faint hum of a Spotify playlist built for rainy days. My phone buzzed. A new email. From Elias Everhart. Subject: "How did it go?" I stared at the screen. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. I started to type. It went exactly the way she wanted it to. Then I paused, erased it, and wrote one word instead. Fine. I didn't owe anyone the play-by-play. Not anymore. I set the phone down and reached for the folder again. Red ink. Crumpled corners. I wasn't going to frame it. I wasn't going to keep it. But I wasn't throwing it away either. Not yet. Because I had a decision to make. One I'd been postponing for years. And I was tired of postponing. I stood slowly, slipping the folder back into my bag like I was tucking away a wound that hadn't finished bleeding. The coffee was still full. Cold. Forgotten. I left it there. The barista didn't notice me leave, and I didn't need him to. The March wind slapped my face as I stepped outside again, but this time I welcomed it. It cleared the fog behind my eyes. Reminded me that shame is only permanent if you let it settle into your bones. I didn't walk home. I turned around. 2 blocks. 7 red lights. One voice in my head, repeating, "You're not finished." The receptionist blinked when I re-entered the lobby of Orion Logic. "Miss Cross," she said, standing. "Is everything all right?" I buttoned my blazer. Slowly, calmly, like armor. "I'm here for the open assessment round," I said. She hesitated. Her eyes searched my face, as if looking for a crack in my conviction. Then she picked up the phone. "Please hold." I waited in silence, my hand steady against the marble counter. Behind me, the digital directory glowed with names that didn't belong to people like me. Not yet. After a pause, she hung up the phone and nodded. "You may go up." The elevator took longer this time, or maybe I just had more thoughts between floors. By the time the doors opened again on the 14th, the tension hit me like static in the air before a storm. The glass walls of the conference room came into view. So did the panel. They were still seated, Miles, Nina, Jordan, and Aubrey. She was laughing again, a low, amused chuckle mid-conversation with Miles. Until she saw me. Her face didn't fall. Not quite. She smirked. "Changed your mind?" she asked, the words laced with silk. "You never were good at letting go." I didn't answer. I walked to the same chair I hadn't been offered earlier, pulled it out myself, sat down. Greg glanced at the others, then leaned back with exaggerated curiosity. "Well then, since you're so eager to be here, how about we put that brain to use?" He signaled to the assistant. A thick test packet landed in front of me with a heavy thud. "Paper," he said. "Not digital. No calculators. No questions. You have 15 minutes. Starting now." I nodded once, picked up the pen, and began. The questions came at me like a wall of static, logic chains, systems optimization, data reconstruction under constraint. I didn't hesitate, not because it was easy, but because I knew what it meant to be underestimated. I knew how to work with silence. I'd built a career in the spaces, No one bothered to look. Somewhere behind me, someone sipped coffee. Aubrey's chair creaked. She leaned toward Nina and muttered, "Let's see if her little sociology-adjacent AI hobby gets her anywhere now." I didn't flinch. I didn't look up. When I finished the final question, my wrist was aching. My breath came sharp, but there were no crossed-out answers. No smudges. Just precision. I pushed the packet across the table. Greg didn't even fake politeness. He flipped through the first few pages, unimpressed, like he was reviewing an amateur screenplay. Then, slowly, theatrically, he tore the entire packet in half. The sound, paper ripping, was louder than any voice in that room. The room froze. The pieces fluttered into the trash can beside him like broken wings. "Impressive penmanship," he muttered. "But we don't hire fiction writers." Someone behind me snorted. I didn't look to see who. I stayed seated, hands folded in my lap. My spine didn't bend. Aubrey tilted her head. "You always were stubborn," she said softly. "Never learned when to quit." I rose, walked to the trash can, and knelt. One by one, I picked up the torn pages, not to salvage them, not for proof, but because I wanted to remember this exact moment. The feel of the answers they didn't read. The weight of a silence weaponized. As I reached for the final page, a pointed heel kicked it away, pinning it under a chair leg. Aubrey leaned forward, her voice a whisper that still sliced through the air, still crawling for approval. I looked up at her and smiled, not because I was okay, but because I was no longer asking. By the time I stepped out of that room again, the air had changed. Not outside, Minneapolis was still bleak and gray, but inside me, something had clicked into place. Not confidence, exactly. Something colder, cleaner. The soft parts had burned away. I didn't go home. Not yet. Instead, I walked the block and a half to a printing center tucked between a parking ramp and a boarded-up bakery. It took 15 minutes to run the files, reprint the evidence. My name was on every page, metadata intact. Server logs, design blueprints, collaboration chains, proof of what I had built and how much they had ignored. By 11 a.m., I was back in the Orion Logic lobby. The receptionist looked up, startled for the third time. "I need to speak to the panel again," I said, voice low but firm. "Now." "They're in a closed session," she started, then caught my eye. She didn't finish her sentence. She just nodded and reached for the phone. Within minutes, I was being escorted back upstairs. No badge this time. No greeting. Just the cold click of my heels and the thud of my heart. The conference room looked exactly the same, but the energy had shifted. You could feel it. Thin smiles, tightened jaws. Even Miles tapped his pen a little too fast. Aubrey didn't bother to hide her smirk. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" she said, folding her arms. I stepped forward. "I'm not here to beg," I said. "I came because you left something out." Laura, one of the HR reps, narrowed her eyes. "What exactly?" "My record. My work. The things that actually matter." I placed the folder on the table and opened it, sliding the documents forward without looking at anyone directly. "You're interrupting a confidential review," Miles began. But then the door behind me opened. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I felt the shift before I heard the reaction. Chairs scooting back, feet shuffling, voices cutting off mid-sentence. Graham Everhart stepped into the room like a quiet force of gravity. He wore black, no tie, sharp as a shadow, calm as a man who had nothing to prove. Everyone stood, even Aubrey. Her voice cracked before her face did. "Mr. Everhart, I mean." "Graham?" "Wait, Coulter." But Graham didn't look at her. He looked at me. He touched the center of my back, lightly, just enough for me to feel it. "You okay?" he asked, only loud enough for me to hear. "Only me," I said softly. Then he turned to the panel. "You all seem to know me very well," he said, scanning the room with eyes like mirrors. Greg cleared his throat. "Sir, if we'd known she was qualified." Graham cut in. Or human. He moved to the head of the table and began to lay out the documents I'd just placed, page by page, metric by metric. Lana Cross, freelance architect on 3 of our internal compliance systems, co-authored the ethics framework for our AI risk module in 2021, the same one some of you still struggle to explain to clients. The color drained from Greg's face. Laura leaned in. Miles went very, very still. Graham slid one photo across the table. This is the metrics report you used last quarter. Her work. Not signed, but hers. He turned to me. Anything you'd like to add? I looked around the room, at the faces that had dismissed me, at Aubrey, whose lips had parted just slightly, like a punchline had died on her tongue. I wasn't here to ask for a favor, I said. I showed up because I believed I had value. Then I nodded toward the table. Turns out I had more than that. I had proof. You just didn't bother to see it. Aubrey opened her mouth, but this time nothing came out. Graham's voice dropped into something colder than steel. I believe this warrants a formal review of interview practices, compliance, conduct. Greg stammered. It was informal, exploratory, not binding. Oh. Graham said almost pleasantly, then you won't mind if we play back the footage. He gestured to the mounted screen on the wall. The remote sat in front of him. No one moved. No one even pretended to object. The screen flickered, and the silence that filled the room as the video began wasn't just uncomfortable. It was damning. The screen flickered, then stabilized. There I was, frozen in digital clarity, standing at the center of the conference room, placing my resume in front of Aubrey. The camera caught everything. The dismissive flick of her wrist, the way she passed it like a discarded menu, the tight smirk she gave Miles, then her voice, clear as crystal in the audio feed. She still dresses like she shops in college clearance bins. A quiet gasp escaped from someone in the room. Maybe Laura. Maybe the legal rep on Zoom. No one said a word. The footage continued. Aubrey interrupting my credentials. Greg flipping through my test packet like he was looking for a joke. Then, frame by frame, the moment he tore it in half, the audible rip echoing in the speakers like judgment carved into wood. And then the whisper. You'll always be beneath me, darling. You know that, right? It hit like a gavel. The air collapsed. The tension in the room was a living thing now, pressing against every wall, every shoulder. No one could look away, not even Aubrey. Her face had gone pale, lips drawn, eyes darting toward every corner but mine. The video ended in silence. Even the hum of the ventilation sounded like a verdict. Then a voice broke through, flat, steady, from the far end of the table. This isn't just bad judgment, said the legal advisor. This is a liability. HR and compliance need to be looped in today. Greg opened his mouth, as if to salvage something, his image, perhaps, but Aubrey beat him to it. She planned this, she snapped, her voice cracking into a shout. She wanted it all on record. Heads turned. Even the assistant looked up. This was calculated, Aubrey hissed. Manipulation. She manipulated all of you. Her voice pitched too high, too fast. I said nothing. That silence, it rattled her more than any retort I could have delivered. She pointed straight at me like I was a virus. I introduced you to him, she barked. To Graham. I brought you into this room. And now you're acting like I'm the villain. I raised an eyebrow. My voice, when I finally spoke, was quiet. Final. Yes, I said. You introduced me to him. And when he chose me, you made sure no one else did. Gasps again. Graham turned to her, slowly, as if giving her one last exit. You admit you interfered with her employment? He asked, his voice low and sharp. I was protecting the company, she shot back. You don't understand. She clung to me for years. She only got here because of me. The only nepotism here, I said. eyes still on her, was you protecting yourself from ever being compared to someone you never thought would rise. Laura quietly slid her notepad away from her. Greg looked at the table. No one spoke up for Aubrey. No one even moved. Aubrey's voice dropped into a murmur, almost to herself now. I wasn't trying to destroy you. No, I replied without blinking. You were trying to erase me. And still she didn't stop. She lunged again, this time toward the edge of the table, grabbing her phone and slamming it down. She's not innocent, she shouted. Look at this. This is what she sent to a client last year, called her a walking disaster in heels. On screen, a fabricated email. My name, my signature, even my company tag. Except, I already knew about it. I calmly reached into my bag, pulled out a small black binder, and slid it forward to the legal team. That email, I said evenly, originated from her IP address, logged in under her temporary admin pass from 2 nights ago. Here's the server log. Dead silence. No shock now. Just confirmation. Graham didn't blink. He looked at Aubrey. Forging internal credentials to defame a team member is more than unethical, he said. You'll be hearing from legal. Effective immediately, you are dismissed. Aubrey's jaw clenched. Her face flushed red. Security entered, silent, swift. And yet, before she left, she tried one last time. You think you're better than me now, she hissed, her voice cracking. Just because he picked you? I looked at her directly, and for the first time in over a decade, I didn't feel small. No, I said. I'm just done being beneath you. Security didn't drag her. They didn't have to, because the room was already done with her. And for once, so was I. When the door closed behind her, it wasn't a bang. It was a hush, the kind that follows truth when it's finally spoken aloud. Graham stood motionless for a second longer, his fingers resting lightly on the closed binder. Then he turned back to the room, now quiet, now watching. I move that we reinstate Lana Cross, he said simply. Effective immediately. Full time. With project lead authority. His tone wasn't emotional. It wasn't proud. It was policy, and that made it even more powerful. All in favor. Laura's hand went up first, almost like reflex. Then Miles. Then Jordan. Then the legal advisor. Then the assistant, who hadn't even looked at me 2 hours ago. Every hand rose. No one objected. Nina, the HR rep, cleared her throat and stood. You're being offered lead strategy consultant for the ethics compliance wing, she said, her voice more composed now. The role was previously occupied by, she didn't finish. My eyes flicked toward the corner glass office, the one overlooking the city skyline. Aubrey's old throne. Nina gestured slightly. It's yours. I didn't hesitate. No, I said. I'd like a desk near the development floor, closer to the team. A pause, then a few nods. Surprised, maybe impressed. Graham's eyes met mine, and he smiled, not the public kind, the quiet kind that says I see you. I stepped forward, reached for the contract, and signed my name in ink that didn't shake. Just before I stepped away, Laura slid a small folded note toward me across the table. I hesitated, then opened it. In her soft handwriting, it read, We're glad you're finally where you've always belonged. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I just smiled and walked out, this time with my head high and my name intact. The elevator down felt different, lighter, not because the fight was over, but because I wasn't carrying doubt anymore. That weight, it had belonged to her, to years of being gaslit, belittled, repackaged as support. I wasn't fragile. I was forged. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. It wasn't warm, but it was enough. I walked 3 blocks before realizing I was still holding the torn test packet in my hand. I stopped in front of a quiet bookstore, stepped under the awning, and opened my bag. Inside was a thin roll of clear tape. I hadn't known why I brought it until that moment. I sat on the edge of the planter and began to tape the pieces back together, not to repair it, but to remember it. Every rip, every stroke of red ink, every attempt to erase me. When I returned to the office later that afternoon, my office now modest, sunlit, tucked between the UX team and back-end devs, I pinned the paper to the corkboard beside my desk. It looked like a scar, and that felt right, because scars aren't shame. They're receipts. Proof you paid the price. Proof you survived. My phone buzzed. A message from Dad. I didn't see everything before. I'm sorry. I stared at the screen for a full minute, then locked it and set it down. Not out of spite, just clarity, because I didn't owe him a reply. And he didn't get to rewrite the story just because I finally stood up in it. The rest of the day passed in a rhythm I hadn't known in years. Productive, steady mine. No whispers, no smirks, no waiting to be seen. Just the sound of keyboards, the click of shared files, and the gentle hum of a team rebuilding something real. By mid-afternoon, I was unpacking the last of my things into the shallow drawers of my new desk. A ceramic pencil holder, a tiny brass bird for my mother years ago, the photo of my dog, long gone now, but always with me in the corner of my frame, and, of course, taped to the corkboard beside my new access badge, the resume they once folded in half. The red ink still bled faintly through the paper, like a ghost refusing to fade. I didn't cover it. I didn't hide it, because that resume wasn't just a document anymore. It was the receipt for every lesson I had paid for in silence. A knock at the door broke my thoughts. She stood in the hallway, nervous, uncertain, barely older than 23, clutching a resume so tightly to her chest it was already wrinkled at the corners. I remembered her from the glass wall, the way her eyes had followed the manager without recognition, the way they had landed on me like a lifeline. Now here she was, called back, just like I'd told her she would be. They said I could meet the project lead, she said breathlessly. That it's you. I smiled. It wasn't triumphant. It was peaceful. Yes. Come in, I said, waving her to the chair across from me. She stepped forward, careful, shoulders tense like she was waiting for the floor to open beneath her. I recognized the posture, because I had worn it like armor for years. I don't know if I'm qualified, she blurted out. That sentence landed differently now. So differently. I looked her in the eye. You showed up, I said. You kept showing up. That matters more than anyone here tells you. She didn't smile exactly, but her shoulders dropped slightly. Hope doesn't come loud. Sometimes it just sighs. We talked. About systems theory, about team culture, about the gaps between resumes and reality. She asked good questions, better ones than I had asked when I first sat in that same chair years ago, being told I was kind and nothing else. When she left, she smiled in that way only people do when they're not fully sure they're allowed to believe in themselves yet. And that's when I knew. It wasn't about Aubrey anymore. It never really had been. It was about all the rooms we let others keep us out of. All the places we were told we had to earn. All the chairs we were never offered, so we built our own and sat down anyway. I glanced at the board one last time. The torn test packet fluttered in the air from the vent. It looked like history, no longer failure, just firewood. Before I left that night, I took one last thing out of my bag. A napkin, old, wrinkled, faded. It had once been stuffed in my coat pocket after a failed pitch meeting back in 2020. I had written something on it in pen that was nearly dried out. Something I wasn't sure I believed at the time. No one sees the quiet builder until the building outlasts the storm. I pinned it above the resume, two truths side by side. Then I turned off the desk lamp. The room dimmed into a soft, golden hush, the kind of light that forgives sharp corners, the kind that feels like a beginning. Outside, Minneapolis pulsed with quiet movement. Cars hummed. Someone shouted across the street. A bus exhaled at the corner. And I walked out, not faster, not slower, just steady, like someone who finally understood that strength doesn't always look like fire. Sometimes it's the refusal to go cold.